Welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today we are going to go back to the vault, back in time, to an interview I did with Aidan Connolly about a year ago. Now, I got a lot of great feedback from this episode that I did with Aidan, so I thought this would be a great time to replay this episode because as this episode is being released, I will be releasing my Nuffield paper that I've spent the last year and a half putting together, traveling around the world, many episodes recorded on my journey along the way that you can go back to and listen to if you haven't heard. But this paper really is been a passion of mine to put together. All of the findings, at least a lot of the findings, I couldn't fit them all in there, but a lot of the findings and interesting things and ideas that came out of my studies over the last year and a half studying for my Nuffield scholarship. And Aidan Connolly was instrumental in helping me along the way with several contacts and just ideas and discussion that I had early on with him that stimulated a lot of things that I brought up in my paper. So I want to thank him by bringing out this recording from a year ago, and I know you're going to enjoy it again. If you haven't heard it, listen carefully. You're going to really love it. Well, Aidan, I think you are uniquely positioned to discuss the innovations that are reshaping agriculture, and particularly in the transformative space of AI. And I'm really glad you're here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So thank you so much for being on the AgCulture Podcast, Aidan.
Thank you, Paul. I have very high expectations, so I hope we're going to meet them. I hope
so too. I think we will, from your perspective at least. So why don't we start out? I went through in the beginning here a lot of the accolades that you have and how involved the 25-year career so far in the AgTech space. So why don't you give us a little bit more in-depth view of what that looks like, some of the roles that you were in and how your career progressed through that before we dive into the specifics of technology.
Yeah, I suppose we could shorten the first part by saying I had a long career with a company, AgTech, that was specialized in natural supplements for animals. In many ways, they were, for me, the original unicorn, at least my unicorn, because I saw them grow from a turnover in the tens of millions, about 23 million when I joined them, actually ending up with over 2.5 billion. So clearly the valuation of the company also grew to unicorn status. And as I look at AgTech startups that I've been involved in, for everything from sensors to robotics, drones to AI, cameras, smart cameras, all of this technology has the potential to be as transformative as AgTech, the company I worked with for those 25 years. So the last 6 or 7 years has allowed me to see inside of startups, to be involved with agribusinesses investing, to look at the investment side of the business as well, to obviously be involved in some teaching roles at universities, MBA programs around the world, and eventually they say start by continuing with what your message is. I did write a book called The Future of Agriculture. It's 160 pages of all of those ideas. It's a free download, so it's not necessarily for making money. But if you forget everything else I've said during the podcast, please download the book free of charge, AgriTechCapital.com. And I think you'll find a lot of my thoughts in this.
Perfect. And we'll put a link to that in our show notes for our listeners too, so we can get to that really easy for them. But where did your passion for innovation and technology come from? Because obviously that's kind of one of the overall arching themes of your career so far.
Yeah, I'm not a person that gets particularly excited about the idea of selling commodities. I'm not particularly a person who's has thought, I want to grow up, I want my career to be about incrementalism. I don't love the idea of reducing the cost of things by 1 or 2%. or getting 1 or 2% more market share, or seeing us grow our companies by 1 or 2% more than we would have otherwise. I like disruption. I like transformation. I like changing the way people think about things. I love the idea of reinvention. And I know these are all words which are now so hackneyed, so used in our business, in our world, that they don't sound particularly exciting. But when you've been involved with it for over 25 years, as you say, it's just exciting to see that the world is respecting that more and more. I've been very excited by seeing the way people who take the bigger risks, who try to change things more, are coming to the forefront, and the kind of cost accounting, keep your costs low, expect that there's no growth opportunities, I feel has been moved to the side in a lot of the businesses that we see. So that for me is exciting. I feel I've been on that journey for a long time. It feels like the world's caught up with it. And today, that's where, if you want to make a dent in the universe, that's where you're going to do it.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself a futurist with all that excitement that you have around disruption and looking toward the future?
Yeah, I'm reluctant to call myself a futurist or futurologist, but luckily somebody else did. Forbes called me a futurologist in the industries of food and agriculture, and so I'll accept their comment as it is. The problem I have with futurologists or future visions are, how far out are we thinking? And I think once you get beyond 10 years, it gets very difficult to predict what comes next. The speed of change, the speed of innovation is extraordinary. And today, agriculture in particular, farming, be it livestock, be it crops, have not been overly affected. But because of the speed of innovation in every other aspect of our lives that's occurring, we have to imagine the next 10 years that's going to come front and center. And I think the changes will be extraordinary. AI is the most visible example of that, but just about every aspect of what we do is really being affected to a degree that's hard to imagine. So when somebody says, where do you think the industry is going to be in 10 years' time, on stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people, I'm okay doing it. But ask me where we're going to be in 30 years' time. Give me a dart, and let's just throw it, because it's really difficult to imagine. I think it's difficult to imagine how the future food is going to be impacted.
Yeah. Why did you choose the food and agribusiness sector to focus on too in your career?
I joined AgTech because it was an international company and I was interested in international business. I'd love to say that my mom and my family were delighted to see me go into farming. I don't think they were. I think at the time they would have been much more excited by the idea of me going into real estate or banking, or something you could tell your friends about, or maybe some sort of cars, or some automobile industry, pharmaceutical industry, something that was very tangible.
Yep.
It's clear now the degree to which people are excited by knowing what food is, why do we consume what we consume, what's coming next. And there are game-changing technologies in the food industry, including these new drugs that will presumably limit our desire for calories. What are the implications of that? AI, but the gaps in agriculture are so huge. I think that it's not difficult to get excited by what's happening. Just at the time, 25 years ago, that didn't seem so visible or so obvious. And of many of the industries that my mom would have been happy for me to do, she mightn't be quite so happy with me doing now.
Right. Well, I think the innovation that most people think of, especially in agriculture right now, and probably the last 3 or 4 years, has been around hardware, the sensory technology and robots and things like that. But is that where you really see the disruption coming from, or is it really moving beyond that? And do you think artificial intelligence, utilizing the data that those things collect, is what's really going to advance agriculture in a way that we can't probably even foresee today?
Well, I mean, I think you put your finger on it. All of these devices have the same opportunity or the same problem. They're going to give us information. They're going to give us data. And if a human has to then make a decision on that, even worse, if a human is inputting that data, we're going to end up in a scenario whereby we will revert back to the same problems we've had. Human bias, human tiredness, human mistakes, lack of education. Our education was too long ago to our not understanding the complexity and the totality of all of that information. So I often describe AI as being the glue that sticks all of these things together. So if I'm robotically milking a cow, if I've attached a sensor to her collar, ear tag, sensor within, a probe, a Roman probe, such as a bolus, that gives me information flow. If I've got sensors in the barn telling me what the temperature is, what the humidity is, what the degree of carbon dioxide, if I'm measuring methane, depending on which version of English you speak, if I've got the environmental sensors, if I'm measuring details about what she's eating, so checking the nutrient content components within the feed, maybe the moisture content of the feed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of this, in the end, has to be interpreted, and I don't know how a human does that. So for me, AI is a fundamental part of every possible technology I can think of. Even in nutrition, we're talking increasingly about nutrigenomics. In genetics, we're talking about genomics. In microflora, we're talking about diversity of microflora in the soil and on the skin of the animal, within the stomach, intestine, or rumen of the animal, in crops. So all of this just feels to me like increasing data flows. What do we do with all that data? We're going to require AI to help us interpret it and make precise, informed, timely decisions.
Okay. So right now, AI is kind of in its infancy commercially in agriculture. What are the biggest gaps that you see with artificial intelligence specific to agriculture right now that need to really get addressed?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times I listen to AI speakers, and I certainly I think anybody talking about AI should start from a position of being very humble and realizing the complexity of it is huge. But most, if not all, the systems that we're using in AI today have a human component still to it, and that human is helping to interpret for the AI system what it's seeing. So the annotation of images, the annotation of data, teaching the system what information means is an essential part of where we are today. And that's the critical piece a lot of people don't understand. Their presumption is more data going into the meat grinder produces better sausages. It's not that simple. So it's not just quantity of data, it is quality of data. And how you curate or how you make decisions over what data to feed into the system is a very essential part of how good your outcomes are. So when you do that in agriculture, with the complexities we have, so we're not in a clean environment. We have obviously moisture, we've got dirt and dust, we've got weather variation. In some cases, we even have issues with connectivity on the farm, and we have issues with the availability of electricity and outages. All of those create complexities that have to be brought in when we're feeding data into the system. So you still need people very much to help teach the system, the AI, how to make better decisions. And that part is a complexity that I'm not going to say does not exist in other industries, but does not exist to the same degree as we have in agriculture. So whenever people say, I'm building an AI system for farming, I'm building an AI system for the food system, I have a little skepticism, of course, having seen it be done. And I think people need to understand this is not going to be as simple as just, right, let's collect lots of information, throw it into these algorithms, and then at the other end, we're going to get magic.
Right, right. How do you think that's going to affect labor going forward right now, in the near term, and then once these models get trained well and are producing actionable insights?
Yeah, it affects massively our labor issues. So a lot of us with, I hate to use the phrase, but heads in the sand, do not recognize that farming is not number one career choice for most people on the planet anymore. And the types of people who will be coming into farming will be attracted by things that they've never been attracted by before, which will be data, which will be automation, which will be a different type of business. With that in mind, I think technologies, robots, sensors, and AI will be about changing the roles in the farming business. That means we have to hire people with different skills. That means we have to presume that we're going to be hiring from a wider range of backgrounds. So not necessarily people who've grown up on farms, but people from a lifestyle perspective, from a family perspective, have been attracted to come out of an urban environment into a rural environment, and will appreciate or like certain benefits that can be provided by that. We have a massive issue globally with the continued aging population of farming. We have a consolidation happening. So whether, it's very obvious in places like China, very obvious in places like Europe and North America, how quickly the farm unit is increasing in size and how that's reducing the requirement for numbers of people. But again, all of that will feed into a desire for greater digitization, greater requirement for AI, and therefore the people who are going to manage that need to understand what AI means, need to understand what digital means, and probably will come from, as I've described it, either very different backgrounds or very different training than we've had traditionally, which has been kind of more, if you're going to be into agriculture, you probably have a word agriculture somewhere in the degree that you did to get into the business.
Yep. And on the adoption of this new technology, especially artificial intelligence, do you see that getting adopted by farm businesses and farmers much quicker than maybe like the robotics that we saw that have been out, I know, in the dairy industry for 25 years now, and it's finally becoming mainstream? Do you see that happening at a much faster rate with things like artificial intelligence?
Well, AI is such a broad subject. And as I described, every technology, if you say I'm putting a robot on to milk my cows, AI is a fundamental part of what that does today. And once the cow's being milked robotically and that data flow is coming through, it's very easy to send the upgrade through, to interpret the data better, to use AI to say, now we've got this either a better way to analyze that information, or we have other data flows from other sensors, from other locations that we're going to combine. So yes, I see AI accelerating faster if the technology, if the sensors, the hardware, the robotics are in place. But we can't kid ourselves. Robotics are slowly being adopted in vegetables and flowers and fruits. The adoption in dairy is much, much less than it would be in crops. And robotics are almost completely extinct from businesses such as pigs, poultry, or other species, other livestock species. So we are in a situation where I crudely say digital adoption in livestock species is 10 years behind crops. Crops is 10 years behind humans, behind the food business. I might even be overly optimistic in describing that. It might even be worse than that. So I think that once those technologies are in place, the adoption of AI can accelerate, and AI will be generations after generations after generations. But you can't use ChatGPT, you can't use these large language models today when so little digital information is being collated or collected on the farm.
Yep. Yeah. So it all starts with collection of the data, and you got to have the infrastructure and hardware in place in order to even start that process, right?
Yeah. But today, if I look at livestock species in general, which is where I have more expertise, let's say, or certainly found myself in a position where there are less people talking about it. An awful lot of information, even when it's collected, is being still collected on a spreadsheet, or it's being collected on a system which is installed in the device, but it's not cloud-based. So these are limitations also, plus the connectivity issue, of course, on farms. These are limitations to how quickly we can move with the AI systems.
Right. Well, and along with that, let's switch over to the technology, the ag tech companies side of things. I know you've had a lot of involvement as an advisory role in actually running some of these companies. There's just tons and tons of startups in the ag tech space that you see every day. There's a new one, it seems like, right? How do you evaluate which technologies are going to be useful in the future and what's going to separate them from the ones that aren't going to be successful?
Not very easily. So I do the traditional things that we all do. I look for a team of people rather than an individual. I look at the solidity of the IP, intellectual property behind it. I look at the usefulness of the technology. Frankly, at the moment, I'm very much looking at, are the companies capable of making money, both for themselves and for their customers? So what's the usefulness of their insight? Will somebody pay for it? I've described, so sorry if somebody's heard me say this before, but I've described that the most awkward conversation you can have with a startup is often, who are you selling this to? They say, well, I've got this great customer. And I remember one mentioning a customer which was a research institute in Europe. And I said, are they paying for it? Well, of course they're not. Well, that's not a customer. But I've got this other farm, they're using it. Well, are they paying for it? No, they're not paying for it. So that's not a customer. You understand, if a customer for me is somebody who's buying it from you, who's actually able to justify for themselves why they're paying for that and the value they see. And if they're not getting value and they're not paying for it, then you don't have a customer. The next thing after they tell me they've got loads of customers, I say, can you give me a phone number? I'd like to call them. So these are very basic things, but unfortunately, that filter takes out 99% of what's out there today. I believe that's changing quickly, but that's where we are. We are still in very much a lot of things coming from startups that don't understand agriculture, university startups that don't understand commerciality. There are great ideas out there, but we need to move, in my view, towards how do you scale something? And that's my interest is not winning a Nobel Prize. It's about scaling something that's going to be useful for farmers, useful for agriculture, useful eventually for the food system in general, and improving transparency, traceability, food cost, and food safety. Those are the things I'd like to see, I'd like to help with, rather than inventing something that is cool and looks great on stage at a startup pitch fest. Yep.
Well, along those lines, even if a company does get to the point where it has paying customers, it is adding value to a sector. A lot of what I'm seeing out there in the ag tech world right now is really focused on one small specific issue. And it might be very insightful. It might have a lot of value today, but I could see a time where a lot of these technologies could all be integrated into the same platform very easily, where you might have one, like you see that with John Deere, right? They buy these companies and they're integrating them into their system, and it's all the John Deere system. So how is that what you foresee happening long term, like what we saw with car companies in the auto industry back in the early 1900s? Or do you see a way for there to be long-term successful businesses that don't get swallowed up by only a few big players?
No, I think you're right. I think that vision, a farmer doesn't want to be dealing with 30 startups or 15 apps and trying to integrate the information themselves, because then we're back to the same problem. It's got the human fatigue factor, human misinterpretation factor, etc. So these have to be joined up. Who's doing that? Not very many. In livestock, we see Everag in the United States, who have acquired quite a number of different technologies, trying to put them together. We've seen groups such as Munters do that on the poultry side, globally as well. On the crop side, we're seeing a little bit more of it, but frankly, not enough overall. And farmers are getting also complaining and getting tired and saying, why do I need to buy all of these different things? Why do I need to be the person saying this app says this and this app says that? So the judgment is to do the piece in the middle. And not enough of that exists. Not enough of that exists. But where do we go with it? Yeah, it has to happen, and it's going to happen. There is no choice. That is the inevitable outcome of all of this innovation.
Okay. And I guess you see that with pretty much any any new technology as it matures through its process, right?
Yeah, but who can do it aside from these groups that are kind of in the size frame that I'm speaking? At some stage, we have to expect that Microsoft or Google or one of the whatever they are, 7, 11 AI giants, superpowers will come in and do something, but they haven't viewed agriculture as an area that they're investing in. Microsoft probably a leader, but in general, they have not focused on agriculture and seen the opportunities that's there. I'm hopeful that that's going to come, but in the meantime, it looks like it's a specialized houses that are bringing all of this together.
Yep. Well, and with that, as it consolidates in the sector, in the industry of agriculture, there's probably a lot of concerns about privacy and things like that. So what, in your mind, what are the ethical considerations that we need to be mindful of as an industry as it does consolidate?
I suppose I'm less concerned about that than some people are. Correctly or incorrectly, I think that when we have concerns about where data goes and how it's stored and how it's going to be used, what's happening with our cows or our chickens or our fish or even our crops in our field, I think is lower down the totem pole than most of the other things we should be concerned with. And I'm also speaking from a position whereby people are very concerned with how their own data is being used, and yet regularly buy an iPhone. And I know even today, to get on a call with you, both of us are pressing accept quickly as possible to download.
We read all the stuff, right? All the warnings.
We couldn't possibly read all of the reasons why we should never do this. It feels like being on a drug commercial where after they tell you the wonderful benefit you're going to get, they give you 17 reasons why you should never do it, but we still do it. Yeah. So if I'm downloading 3 apps to be able to track my movements, be it Google Maps, Apple Maps, and Waze, and if I'm also knowing that the phone itself is listening to and tracking everything I'm doing, I'm struggling to see the concerns about agricultural data being as critical. But I don't want to underplay it either. It's an important thing for us to be aware of. And I are there ways in which that could be used against us in agriculture? Perhaps, but I think the consumer request or demand for transparency and or the value that could be gained by joining up all this information together, I think outweighs any of the concerns we should have.
Okay. Well, I want to quick ask you something that I was wondering. I wanted to get your perspective on from a global scale. You know, we have very, very different systems across the globe in dairy, livestock and crops. Everywhere you go, India is very different than Australia, than New Zealand, than the US, than Central Europe. And especially in these developing countries, do you see a real big opportunity for advancing these technologies a lot quicker in their growth phase or their development phase than what you might see had happened in developed countries like the US or Europe?
Yeah, Paul, of course. I think that the digital leapfrog, the ability to not go through some of the things that's happened in Western countries, in developed countries, or even developing countries, for Africa should be very exciting. And I've gone through various phases. I went through extreme optimism that the 3D printer could help Africa tremendously by not having to wait for parts to arrive, that robotics could be useful that we could do things with using virtual reality, AR to teach people. We could use virtual markets to allow transparency of pricing. We could use videos on YouTube. I mean, all of that is there. And then I went through the phase of, but why are these startups seemingly focused on getting money and winning prizes in Western Europe or with NGOs instead of actually going and selling things? Well, because it's easier to win prizes than it is to actually do the business. And the business is hard because you are disrupting an existing model with incumbents who are not going to be happy that you've increased the transparency of what the price of a chicken is in the market or what the price of corn is at the port. They're naturally enough, they're saying, well, that's how I make my money today. But I have been pleasantly surprised to see, in particular, I was in Kenya recently, I was surprised to see how some very basic ways of teaching people about chicken disease, chicken nutrition, how to manage problems, take photographs of, get virtual or get veterinarian advice from distance, how that's helping smaller holder farmers. So maybe I've gone from the hype cycle, from the peak of hype to the valley of disillusionment, and now I'm into some sort of reality. Not all the things I was hoping for. We've seen the sharing of tractors, etc. Not all of those have really benefited or scaled to the degree that I hoped for, expected, but they are on their way. And the ones that have nuts and bolts of this is how I help somebody make money at any level and any size, simply with relatively low cost models, I think those are starting to prove themselves out. I think the hardware plays, as I described, the 3D plays, those should be successful, but they haven't really shown much traction yet.
And just because of the upfront cost, you think, or the amount of service that's needed to service those?
All of the above. Yeah, I think the upfront cost is always a factor. I think servicing the technology, what happens when they break down. If you think having a robotic milker in the middle of Minnesota in wintertime break down when you're, 4 hours from Twin Cities or whatever if that's going to be a problem, you can only imagine what it's like in the middle of Zambia or Zaire, where there could be other reasons why you can't even get the parts down the road.
Right. What's one or two really interesting, potentially really disruptive technologies that?
It's a really good question. So I've always been interested in, let's say, the idea of creating new forms of meat. I've always been interested in the idea of insect meal, and I have loved the idea of obviously digital farming in general. I do think alternative energy is just an easy take home, and there's so much innovation taking place around it. So smart electricity systems, solar generation, wind power, methane digesters, even some of these hydrothermal, injecting water into the ground, bringing it back up. And I think we're seeing tremendous innovation around that. So I definitely like those areas. I think they're nuts and bolts investments. It's easy to play out what happens, and they're getting better and better and better. Some of the technologies I mentioned a minute ago obviously are not as exciting as they would have been in the past. I think precision in nutrition for plants, understanding better what a plant really needs in real time, and animals, I think just provides benefits for all the pieces I've mentioned of improvements in efficiency, animal welfare, health, and not least sustainability. So I see those as being very, very exciting. Always liked microbials. I had a lot of background in that. I've got a couple of patents in that in terms of animal livestock. But we're facing big issues in crops.
Yep.
So disease control, microbials for replacement of fertilizer. I think it's more partial replacement than full replacement. They face challenges, but they're exciting. But we still have big challenges. Like I've been involved in a startup that has a natural replacement for herbicides. I don't see very many other options out there. I know people are talking about technologies such as zapping weeds with lasers. I'm struggling still a little bit with that. I like precision application of herbicides, and I like the idea of novel herbicides such as natural herbicides. But those pieces where there's a big issue in agriculture that's not going away, and where technology starts to arrive to solve that, that's where I would like to see resources going. So I think those are the ones I like. Hopefully, back to my original comment, not incremental, but just not so far out there that we can't imagine. It's not like whatever they used to call Euro Disney was never, never profit land.
Right.
So hopefully these technologies are not never, never profit. They have to be profitable both for the user and also for the producer.
Right. Well, before you go, I just want to wrap up. with a question. I guess it's a two-part question. What advice would you give ag tech innovators and to farmers about the future of technology?
Yeah, well, in terms of ag tech innovators, be optimistic. Realize that you need to bring farmers into your tent, get them to be advisors, get to be part of your innovation process, get them to teach you what they like and what they don't like. It's absolutely essential. And I think the people who do it are the ones that clearly become successful and hopefully, get the exit or get the profitable future they're looking for. For farmers, I try to encourage people to be open-minded to technology. It's very easy to be skeptical, cynical, or to laugh at something that doesn't succeed or isn't working. You have to ask yourself the question, if the startup is not successful at solving my problem or solving my industry's problem, who wins? And the answer is nobody. But we can definitely say who loses. We lose as farmers. So as farmers, we have to be part of the innovation process, in my view, and almost help or encourage the startups to think proactively about how to help us. Because if they're successful, then we're successful. And that is a confrontational kind of commercial relationship the farmers traditionally have had with suppliers has to go away when it comes to innovation.
Well, those are great words of wisdom. Aidan Connolly, thank you so much for joining us on the AgCulture Podcast today. It's so good to have you. Check out his book. Again,
Check out the book.
The Future of Agriculture.
It took, it's a labor of love. It took almost 5 years to get it published. But and as the phrase goes, the reason, if you like any of it or you like all of it, it's definitely not down to me. There was a very big team of people who helped me research it. And we obviously tried to take ideas from lots of smarter people out there as well. So I hope if anybody finds anything in it that's wrong, I'm also very open because it's an online book, so it makes it easy to edit it if we need to fix things for the future or even tomorrow's edition.
Perfect. And we'll have that again on our show notes. So once again, thank you so much, Aidan.
Cheers. Enjoy the conversation and look forward to seeing you again.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode that I did with Aidan Connolly a year ago. As I said earlier in my intro, I will be releasing my Nuffield paper within a day or two of when this recording gets released. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll be in Chile that week, presenting actually at the International Dairy Conference, Federation Conference in Santiago, Chile. And after that presentation, I will be releasing the paper. So if you did not receive a copy, I'm going to be sending out a copy on the day of release to people that have sent me their emails. If you're interested in getting a copy, please email us at our website at agculturepodcast.com, or you can send me a direct message on LinkedIn. That's usually the platform that I check the most, and I will make sure you get a copy of that to review and check out. You can also go to the Nuffield International website. That will have the paper on it as well. So I hope you're as excited about this release as I am. A lot of you have been messaging me and encouraging me along the way. I just want to say thank you so much for that. It's been a long time coming. I'm very excited for the future, and I've got a lot of things that I'm working on right now that I can't really talk about, but are big things, big changes, big opportunities for the world of agriculture, specifically livestock. And I will be sharing those with you here in the near future. So stay tuned, and we will see you next week for another exciting episode of the AgCulture Podcast. Thanks for listening.